We are going to get started again. Thank you, everybody. It has been such a good day. So hello again. I realized at the beginning of the morning, I introduced you to the mundane logistics and our people, and I never even said who I was. So hi, I'm Kathy Hessler. I'm the Assistant Dean of the Animal Law Program here at GW, and it is my great pleasure to be moderating this last panel of the day, how attorneys think about and use AI. So in this morning, right, we had the panel that talked about what is AI, what about the ethical concerns, and what is animal law, right? And then we moved into what are the regulations around AI, and how do we think about that with respect to animals? And then we had an application. How do we put animal law and coding and ethics, animal welfare together in our Tiger ID panel? And so what we're going to be doing in this panel is thinking about the legal perspective a little bit more. So when attorneys are thinking about AI, like what are they thinking about, right? What questions are they asking? How are they thinking about using it internally for lawyerly like projects and activity and workflow? And what products are they using? What's available to them? What can be created? And then specifically, obviously, within the context of animal protection legal work. So our wonderful panelists are Tony Eliseuson from ALDF, who's the litigation program director for the Animal Legal Defense Fund, where he oversees a team of nearly 24 attorneys and professional staff who file strategic, high-impact lawsuits that enforce and expand protections for animals under the law. He joined ALDF in 2017 after a 15-year career where he was a litigation partner in the Chicago office of Denton's US LLP. He is an avid sports fan, and very often frustrated golfer, apparently. And enjoys spending his free time with his rescue buddy, Darwin, a Black Lab Plus, who likes to think he is still a puppy. So thank you, Tony. Next, we'll have Sam Tucker-Davis, who's the founder of Open Paws, which is an organization dedicated to building open source AI tools that strengthen the global animal advocacy movement. He develops technology that activists and nonprofits can use to work more effectively, from exposing factory farm practices to scaling compassionate campaigns. He co-leads the Code for Compassion Hackathon, which is a collaborative event that brings together developers, designers, and advocates to create innovative AI-powered solutions for animals. And his work is rooted in the belief that technology, when used thoughtfully and ethically, can create a kinder and more just future for all beings. And then we have Laurel Paluzzi, who's the founder of LAP Legal LLC and Macadia Strategy Solutions LLC. She has over 15 years of expertise at the intersection of legal operations, technology, transactions, and operational excellence. She's also served as director and head of legal at Solo.io Inc., where she was the first legal hire. Sometimes lawyers really are needed, right? She's also been in strategic roles at Elastic, where she built and led the legal operations function. And she's a GW Law alum, yay. Welcome back. A lifelong animal advocate, a vegan of 14 years, and currently lives in Chicago with her husband and 2 cats, Cashew and Pistachio. Without further ado, we will have Tony join us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathy, and thank you, everybody. It's been a really great day. I've learned so much from all of you that have spoken before us. So I'm going to be presenting on, before you can use AI, you have to implement the process of using AI in an organization. And so I'm going to be talking about how an organization would start with AI, potentially, using it as an example of the Animal Legal Defense Fund. I hope I set my timer. So I ramble. So I'm going to go long. So I'm going to have to skip over. I'm going to have to skip over parts of this, but I'm still going to do a funny thing to start. So every year in the litigation program, we vote on a theme for the year, and it's always a TV show. And I'll start every presentation with the team with like sort of a funny meme. And I'm very uncool, so a lot of times I don't even understand the meme. So it's sort of doubly funny because I don't really get the pop culture reference, but it's funny too. So our theme this year is Parks and Recreation, which I know nothing about because I'm not cool. And this is, I think, a scene with a character named Ron Swanson, where he realizes how invasive the privacy issues are on the internet. And his solution to it is just throw his computer in the dumpster, which I thought was fitting because this is about lawyers thinking about technology and AI. And a lot of lawyers are sort of technophobes, right? So a lot of lawyers are probably like, well, let's just throw it in the garbage, which is a solution, but it's probably not a good solution. Welcome to the new age. So I'm going to be using the Animal Legal Defense Fund as sort of an example. And in order for that to make sense, you have to have a little bit of context, at least about Animal Legal Defense Fund. So it's a legal organization. We do legal work to advance animal rights and animal interests in the legal system. We have about 80 people. We have a revenue of about $15 to $20 million a year, just so you have a sort of a sense of the size and scope. We're structurally, we have legal programs, right? So I'm the litigation program director. There's a legislative affairs program. There's a criminal justice program. There's an animal law program. There's a pro bono program. We're just about to start a transparency and regulatory affairs program. And the new director actually starts next week, and she's amazing, and I can't wait for her to start. But I'm not sure it's public, so I'm not going to say her name, but she's great. And a lot of you know who she is. And then we have all the nonprofit operations that you would need to run an organization, right? So we have an HR team, a finance team, an IT team, a communications team, a development team, an events team, an operations team. I feel like I'm forgetting people, which I feel bad about. But you get that sense like structurally, right? How the organization is functioning. And the reason why I lay that out is because, how are we going to implement AI at Animal Legal Defense Fund? We started a working group to do it. And that's a management process, right? AI is technical, and a lot of the folks here deal with the technical part of AI. But from an organizational perspective, if you're thinking through how are you going to actually use AI, you have to have a management process that thinks through all the compliance issues, right? And all the personnel issues, right? And each organization is going to be different, right? Each group. So I'm using the Animal Legal Defense Fund as an example, but there's different personalities at each organization, right? There's different strengths, there's different weaknesses, there's different pain points. There's just different dynamics and different issues. And if you're going to be successful in implementing AI or anything, you have to craft your process with those unique things in mind, right? And so that's why I sort of give some context. So what do we do at ALDF? So we started a working group, which then we came up with a fun name because I like fun names. So we voted on different names. We came up with Animal AI Justice Lab as our sort of working group name. And we started with the kickoff. So I had been playing with AI, just in my personal capacity for fun, like, really heavily, like maybe a year ago, and started getting super excited about it. Like I saw all the things it could do. And so I started spamming everybody at work, like, oh my gosh, look what I do with AI, And I think I annoyed them so much that they were like, well, why don't you figure out how we can implement AI at ALDF? So they asked me to start this working group. And so what I did is I went to the leadership team. So I mentioned each of these, units and departments and legal programs at ALDF. Well, they all have directors, and each of the directors is a leadership team. So I just went to my peers and said, hey, we're going to be starting this working group. Here's sort of in broad strokes what we're going to try to accomplish. We want volunteers. Here's sort of the commitment level, things like that. Can you talk with your teams and see who's interested in joining the working group? And ideally, we'd get, at least one person from each group, right? Because that person would then facilitate information flow between the working group and between their teams. And so they did that. And there was tremendous excitement, right? Everybody's really excited about AI, for good reason. That's why we have the conference, right? And so, we're an 80-person organization. The working group has 20 people, right? It's like literally a quarter of the organization, which typically, if you're thinking about it through a management lens, you might not want a really large group, right? It just creates, it's harder to move along. It's harder to get decisions made. It tends to slow things down. But thinking through the process from a management lens, I really, really wanted a large group. So anybody who had any interest at all, I wanted to join. I just wanted every voice, every person who expressed any interest to be part of the group, even if that ended up with a huge group, because there's other ways you can try to manage a big group. And the reason why I wanted everybody to participate, there's sort of two buckets of people, right? There are people like me who are really excited to use AI, saw like all the ways it might be helpful for our work and increase our impact. And then there are people who are on the other side of the spectrum, right? People who were worried about the environmental impact, right? Everyone was concerned about these things, right? It's a balance. The people that were pro AI just saw the benefits outweighing sort of the drawbacks. But there are people that are certainly on the other end of the spectrum who are really worried about the environmental impacts, really worried about job replacement, worried about creative rights and artistic rights and things like that. The point, some of the folks in the organization were of the view, we think ALDF should just draw a bright line rule and just not use AI at all. We just shouldn't even participate in a system that's going to cause this sort of environmental damage. And I just mentioned that because so there's these two groups, and you'd think it would be easier for me to care more or to want the pro people in my group. And I wanted them in the group too, but I really cared mostly about that other group, the people who were the most skeptical, who had the greatest concerns about AI, to the point I reached out one-on-one to them to have them join the working group. Because really the whole point of this working group was to get as diverse a set of perspectives as we could, get everybody working together, talking about their concerns, and seeing if we could, through that process, come to consensus on a path forward for ALDF, where we would implement AI in a way that sort of balanced these concerns in a way that was right for ALDF, right? That fit our culture, that fit sort of our balance of things. And you can't do that successfully unless you have the people, with every side of the perspective. I ramble, so I'm probably already long, but so you can't fight.
Pick up a little. I didn't know. Should we move the microphone?
Oh, do I not have a microphone? Oh, I'm sorry.
It's just up there, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
I am a soft spoken, so that makes sense. I apologize.
Thank
Yeah, thank you. I had fun with the names. The names of the slides are irrelevant. They're just fun for me. So you have a working group now. So what are you going to do? You have to implement. There are certain things you have to do before you're going to implement AI. And one thing for sure is an AI audit, right? How are the teams using AI? How do they want to use AI? And thankfully for us, we partnered with OpenPause and Sam and his team, who are amazing. And they're not paying me to say that. I swear, they're really amazing. And we're legal professionals and nonprofit professionals. We're not AI professionals, right? But OpenPause is the AI professionals, and they have this entire AI audit process that we basically stole from them with their permission. And the working group used it, and each of the members went with their teams and sort of gathered all the information. And then we, as a group, am I better now, or am I still too quiet? Is it better? Okay. And we gathered all that information together and put the information to OpenPause. And then they sent us this AI audit report. And sort of there's I could talk about each of these things like for an hour. But the really great things about the AI audit report, so we knew the things we wanted to try to use AI for, right? We had all these ideas for projects. We had no idea whether they're realistic or not, right? And so one thing that OpenPause did is it took all these different projects and sort of categorized them. Like, here are things that could be quick wins, wouldn't require a lot of data integration, would be pretty easy to implement. And then on the other side, here are things that would be more transformative, like bigger projects would take much more time to implement, would require greater data integration, which is important for us because we, as an organization, you have to be in a certain place before you can have data integration, right? You need to have compliance things figured out. You need to have, policies and protocols, and you have to consider risks and things like that. So that was one great thing of the AI audit report. And then the other thing was, part of the flow was, what are your processes as an organization where you're spending a lot of time, but you don't feel like it's that impactful, right? It's taking a lot of your time. You wish you could speed it up or automate it. And so we sent off all these ideas, but we had no idea if AI could actually fix those issues. And then through this audit report, OpenPause said, yeah, actually you can. And here's sort of how you do this one. And here's how you do this one. And it was just super helpful, just so for us as a group, as we're thinking forward about how we want to use AI and whether we even want to use AI, to see how it actually might help our day-to-day work and make us more impactful as an organization. And then another thing that you'd want to, if you're going to have a working group, and I know I'm talking mainly about management processes, I suppose, but that's what I do. I'm a manager for the most part. But another thing you'd want to do is you have a working group. Like, what's the point of the group? How is it going to function? How is it going to do its work? You have to, in some level, you have to create, we created a working group charter. It could be informal, right? You could just have an informal understanding amongst the group about how you're going to do things. But because we had this really large group, and because I wanted to accomplish a bunch of things organizationally through this group, not just implementing AI, I thought it made sense to have a really, really robust working group charter. So we did. We created this really robust charter, and it talks about, what are we going to do? Like, what are our deliverables? What do we want to accomplish? On what timeline are we going to accomplish them? How are we going to go about doing it? Like logistically, what are our communication norms? Things like that. What are our roles and responsibilities as members of the working group? What's our decisional process, right? And we, in the working group and ALDF in general, we're a very consensus-driven model. So we try to reach consensus on all the decisions, but you're not always going to reach consensus, right? So in the working group charter, we have a specific mechanism. If we're unable to reach consensus on something, here's how we tee it up for the leadership team to make the ultimate judgment call on whatever it is that we didn't reach consensus on. There's a guiding principle section, which I say because I'm just super proud of it. So if anybody out there is sort of in my position and dealing with this in an organization, yeah, I'm happy to share more about the working group charter because I think we did a pretty good job with that. Some other things you'd want to do when you're implementing AI, you probably want to do a data audit, right? Which is something you should do. And I'm not the tech person, so I can just give you sort of a high level perspective of this, but you'd want to understand what data do you have? What systems are using it? How do the systems interface with each other, right? Data, we're lawyers, so we have data that has attorney-client confidential information in it. So we have ethical and professional responsibility guidelines that sort of dictate how we can use that data and what we can do with it. There's all sorts of privacy laws out there, right, that dictate data. You should be doing data audits routinely anyway, but for sure, as an organization, before you launch AI, you should have a sense of what laws govern your data and make sure you're in compliance with the law before you launch AI, because it's good to be compliant with the law. And that's something that you'd want to do, a data audit. I have like 3 or 4 really important things, I think, points of wisdom in this presentation. And this is one of them, IT resource considerations. And this is twofold, right? You really need to think about what kind of resources you have. So at ALDF, we're really lucky. We've got 2 full-time IT people on our staff, but they've got full-time jobs, right? They have to deal with our email. They have to keep our laptops working. They have to make sure none of us click on links and go to ransomware and things like that, right? They have stuff to do. They have full-time jobs. You can't, as an organization, just say, hey, we want to implement AI. AI as technology. Hey, IT people, do AI for us, right? You just can't pound on their plate like that without taking other things off of their plate. You need to give them support and additional resources or remove a bunch of things from their plate, which I just mentioned because I think people forget about that, right? They just think, well, we've got people who, can do this. We'll just keep dumping stuff on their plate. And then they're surprised when things take forever to get done, right? And then the other component to that is you have to think about a competency perspective, right? And so I'll put this in my terms. I'm a lawyer. I don't know everything about all areas of the law. There's all sorts of areas of law I know nothing about. My friends and my family will come to me all the time with legal questions because I'm a lawyer. And I'll be like, that's a great question. You should get the answer right. I'm not the person to answer that question for you because that's not my area of law, right? If I were you, I would hire my own lawyer with a specialized practice in that area. Well, I'm assuming that's the same thing for IT people, right? Just because IT people are really good at what they do day to day, that doesn't mean they're AI experts or experts in other parts of IT. You need to get the AI experts like Sam and his team and probably a bunch of the people in this room. And here's a lawyer talking to IT people about what works in the IT world, but I'm assuming it sort of translates. And then finally, you want to use AI, right? So what did we do? We thanks to the OpenPause AI audit, we started with some initial quick win projects, and I'm happy to sort of talk about the pilots. Okay, I'm running long, yeah. I'm happy to talk about the quick win projects, but one was a sandbox, and it was basically just giving the working group team access to an enterprise model that they could use and sort of play with AI. And I stress, this is another important one, I stress enterprise model because there's a security with that, right? It controls your confidential information. And if you're in an organization right now and you haven't fully gone through this process, you might have all sorts of policies and protocols in place about, not using AI. You might prohibit AI use. You might have all sorts of policies about what you can do with confidential information. But just human nature, if you're any size of organization, I guarantee you a bunch of people on your team are using all these free platforms. There's just too many of them out there. They're using them for work, even if it's prohibited. And I guarantee you at least some subset of them are using confidential information out there. And that's true for the industry too. One thing to think about, the industry people are doing this too. So these public models right now are getting filled with all sorts of confidential information because of these gaps in organizational processes. So the thing I would stress to anybody at an organization, if you haven't gotten your team on a secure platform or an enterprise platform, your first priority as an organization should be to reach out to Sam or somebody like Sam and figure out a way to lock it down and give people access to an enterprise model, because otherwise they're just going to keep putting your confidential information in the public models. All right. So whenever I do anything, I never do as good of a job as I want to do, right? I make mistakes. And I always try to learn from that, right, to get better. So I thought I'd share some implementation lessons learned so far for people who might be going through the same thing that we're going through. I would really stress identifying organizational bottlenecks early and trying to find ways to break through them. And I say that even though I actually think I'm really good at this, and I did do this, but I underappreciated the impact of AI. So I think with AI, it's just so big, it's so uncertain. There's so many unknowns. People are worried about job replacement, all these things. It triggers an emotional response in ways that other things don't. And I think because of that, there's certain people, when faced with a problem like that, that's so big and they can't figure out sort of the path forward, they just sort of shut down. And I think we faced a little bit of that at ALDF, and we're going to be fine. We're going to work through it. But I would just stress to people who are not as far along this journey as ALDF that you should really spend a lot of time on that. Think through the people who might fit that description at your organization and be much more proactive about working with them and helping them get comfortable with sort of the next steps in the process, because I didn't do as good of a job as I wish I had. I already talked about this a little bit with the IT reality check, but the thing I didn't do is I knew that, and I didn't start working to get, we have Open Pause, but Open Pause only has so much capacity. We don't have IT day-to-day people who can do sort of the mechanics of implementing the technology. At some point, we're probably going to need to bring in consultants and outside experts. Well, I should have put together a list of those people, and some of those people might be in this room right now, and you should send me your information if so, because we need help. We're going to need help as we start to launch it. And then this techno fear, noise versus reality, I'll be really quick on this, or I'll try. So one thing, and this isn't even really lessons learned, what I figured out over time is some of these concerns seem to moderate by themselves without me doing anything. And I think what it was exposure. I think as people are playing with all the free models that are out there, people are warming up to AI as they see how powerful that it is and what it can do to make their lives better and their work better. So that I would just emphasize that just shows you really should get people on an enterprise model earlier as an organization, because just giving people exposure to it will warm them up and get them more comfortable with using AI as an organization and help you get, past some of the concerns. All right, I have basically no time. The future might be further than you think. I'm not going to be able to. The point I would make here, I'm not going to be able to get into the specifics, is just if you aren't as far along as ALDF, you could get discouraged as an organization, perhaps, and say, "Oh, we're too late. Everybody's way ahead of us." I really, and I'm not the best person. This was AI and me talking, but AI tends to give you the answer you want. But the point I wanted to make here is, I think there's probably going to be a period of time where there's going to be improvements, but it's not like, it's not going to change a whole lot. And so even if you think you're behind the curve, there's time to sort of catch up and still really leverage AI, and be sort of on par with everybody who's just further ahead of you now. Wow. Very quick random thoughts. And these are all from AI. You got to use it right now as a co-pilot. It's not an autopilot. You have to, supply the reasoning. You have to verify. You have to execute. We've all probably seen the articles about lawyers who are filing things, even judges who are putting things in their opinions where there's fake cases, right? You just can't do that. You have to be a partner with AI. And here's some of the things that AI even told me, right? It's very confident when it's wrong, right? So you should really cross-examine it, keep probing it. That's where I find the value with AI. I use it as a thought partner. I really just, keep asking it questions and learning more about the premises it's using. And I mean, honestly, that's life advice for any law students in here. If all you did your whole career was ask a lot of questions and listen and pay attention and gather that information, just sponge it up, you'd be kind of a superstar, because people don't do that as much as they should. Just gaining information from people and asking questions is so valuable. And the same with AI, biased inputs. This is my perspective, which people might strongly disagree with, but I think right now AI just draws from human crap, right? It's looking at all the human crap that's out there and it's trying to give you the best of the crap. but you can't really understand what level of crap it is until you ask it questions and figure out where its flawed premises are. And the crap is too tough. It's harsh. I know the AI people are going to be upset with me, but that's what it's doing. It's largely drawing from, from human research papers and things like that, right? Context window, I don't have enough time. Well, this is this is another rant for sort of the law students, primarily, and this is just my opinion. And it's a little bit of tough love, right? But people are very worried about job replacement. I think you have a choice with AI. Okay, there's really two broad stroke paths to take. You can leverage AI. You can use it as a thought partner. You can use it as a tool. It can improve your critical thinking skills. I learned how to code. Like I didn't know Python was a coding language at my time. But I learned how to code a little bit, not very well, but like I learned a little bit of how to code by just working with AI and asking it questions. And so you can become so much better than yourself with AI as a partner, right? That's one path. If you choose that path, it's going to be very hard to replace you, right? Because you're adding value to AI. You're learning how to use it and leverage it. The other path that I'm very worried about, and we're already starting to see, like in job applications and student papers we get sometimes, where I wonder if people even read the paper they're submitting or if they just had AI crank it out, is you can go the other direction, right? You can use AI as a crutch. It's really easy to just do that and not spend a lot of time and energy on it, but you're degrading your own skills when you do that, right? And you're basically setting yourself up to be replaced because I know how to use AI. I don't need somebody else to use AI and just feed me what I can do myself, right? So I really think, and again, tough love, but I really think there's like a path for people, especially early on in their careers, on how they're going to use AI. And it's a choice. It's a choice. So I would, think about it and choose the right path. And this is my last slide. This is just AI sort of summarizing some of these points better than me. Thank you to everybody. Sorry I went long. That's my buddy Darwin, who's adorable. And thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Hey everyone, I'm Sam, founder of Open Pause, and I'm going to talk through some really practical ways to use AI, referencing some of the actual tools that we built. But first of all, like, why even bother with using AI? I think one really good way to think about it, kind of building on what Tony said, is that this is not a replacement for, real critical thinking, for all of the things that we do as activists, but it's a force multiplier for us. So now one person can do what 10 people could have done before. Now, when it comes to currency, one of the most valuable currencies we have is our time, and that's probably especially the case for you lawyers in the room. So manual research is something that takes many, many hours, as I'm sure you know. And this is something that's a huge bottleneck. So the solution here, AI can accelerate discovery from hours, days, months to seconds or minutes. So I'm going to go through some tools that help you with the research part, and then we'll talk a little bit about ways that you can build on these tools in order to strengthen your litigation and to organize as a movement. So there's 4 core tools that we have at Open Pause that I think will be relevant to the people in this room. The first and most obvious one is our Navigate Legal Issues tool. So essentially, this works as something like a legal research tool rather than a legal advice tool. So this is going to automate the process of finding case law that's relevant. It's going to find information on judges, make predictions about what kind of arguments they'll find effective. So, you could take something very simple that would just be like, we're planning a protest at this lab in California, for example. What do I need to know about the legalities of doing that? So this is a tool that I think is useful regardless of what your current experience is with the law. This is something that I think, for experienced lawyers can speed up a lot of the process around case discovery. And for just activists who don't know where to get started, it can also be a helpful starting point there. Another tool that we have is our Track Key Issues tool. So you can set this up for either daily or weekly updates, and you can define whatever it is that you want to be updated on. So for example, if you want to get specific updates on animal welfare legislation, on new cases that touch on the issues you work on, you can sign up for these updates and you'll get daily or weekly emails that are really like tailored to that issue. So you could kind of think of this as similar to something like Google News Alert, but if you had a Google News Alert that was truly intelligent and understood actually what you want to get. So you're not just talking about keywords here, you're talking about like deep context on what it is that you're working on and the AI prioritizing exactly that which matters to you. So the next tool we have is chatting with AI. So I'm sure a lot of people here are familiar with things like ChatGPT. One of the limitations of that is obviously this issue of hallucinations, where it can make things up. So we address this by connecting a database to our AI with information relevant to the animal advocacy movement, which includes a large corpus of legal texts as well. So every time that you're chatting with this AI, the first thing it's going to do is actually read through that database. It's going to find the right information, and it's going to give you the sources in its response. The final tool that will be relevant here is our individual research tool. So this is particularly useful probably for things like if you're trying to propose, let's say, policy to a particular politician, if you're trying to think of what arguments are going to work with a specific judge. This tool does really in-depth research where it looks at their social media profiles, it looks at public statements. Even in the cases of judges, it can look at previous judgments that they've made and why they've made those. And another really cool feature of this is with all of that information, the AI can actually predict personality traits. It can predict how agreeable, conscientious, extroverted, introverted people are. It can predict something called their DISC profile, which is a tool that's often used in sales to figure out how people make decisions. And it can use all of that information to give you really personalized instructions on what is the best way to reach this person, to convince this person. So the way that these tools work, in particular, the legal research tool and the individual research tool, is through a process that we call multi-model verification. So again, one of the big issues that we have in AI is this idea of the AI just making things up. So how do we prevent that, or at least reduce the risk of it as much as we can? So we use a 5-step process here. The first step is discovery. So this is where the AI has access to a bunch of tools. It has things like court documents, for example, documents from Freedom of Information Act requests, and it does this very wide search. So whatever your query is, it's looking at what could potentially be relevant here. So it puts together this big list of all the things it thinks might be relevant to help answer your question. We then go to the next step of prioritization. So this is where the model looks at all of those resources and it decides of these, what's actually the most important to investigate in depth in order to give a good answer. Once it's prioritized, it then goes and it retrieves the full text. So before in discovery, it might have been looking at a lot of different summaries of legal cases. Retrieval is the stage where it will go and read the full case. So once it's done this, it's already got its top resources and all of the details on that that's relevant to answering your question. So this is the point at which it can start writing the report, which is the actual response that you're looking for. But what's really important here is we don't want to just trust that just because we've given the AI the right information, that the report itself is going to be right. So we have this 5th step where we essentially give the AI all of the text that we've retrieved. We show it the output of the report that was generated, and we have this verification step that says, is there any statement in this report that is not backed up by what you're seeing in these documents? So what we can actually do then is create this verification loop. So if we find that there is a hallucination, we simply feed it back to the report writer. We say, this wasn't in the document, correct it. And it can go through that loop as many times as it needs to until it's actually past that verification stage. So this is how we're able to get much more reliable, much more accurate responses from AI, because we're using, first of all, multiple different types of models as we go throughout this process. So we use, for example, Gemini 2.5 for a lot of the early stages where it's having to make a lot of tool calls to gather lots of information. And then we can use more intelligent models like GPT-5 in order to actually compile the reports and check that there's no hallucinations. We also have the AIs checking on these other AIs, which keeps it factual by design. So everything that we build to is completely open source. So we base a lot of these workflows on a workflow automation tool called N8N, and we open source these workflows so that, in addition to sort of the ease of using our hosted tools, anybody can host these tools for themselves, and that's going to have really important privacy and security implications that we'll talk about next. But the other benefit of us open sourcing these tools is that they become customizable. So these are not static tools where, the way they work now is the only way they can work. Because we open source them, you can work with developers to take them and to apply them to your specific use case, to extend upon them, to audit them, to verify anything you want. So now let's talk about how we keep the AI private. So there's a few different ways that you can address this problem. So before I talk about any of these, let's talk about like the default option, which Tony mentioned, of using the free model. So if you do that, most of these companies will allow that data to be trained on. So if you're giving confidential information to ChatGPT on a free plan, there's a very real probability that that data can end up in training. It can end up then being leaked by the model. So how do you address this problem? So enterprise solutions, one example, on those enterprise plans, then you're essentially entering sort of an agreement with the cloud company that says they're not going to train on your data. But ultimately, they still have access to your data. So if you have something that's really high risk and you can't even risk having it on someone else's cloud, you have three different options. The first option is you can host an AI model locally. So you could host this on your laptop, for example, but there's going to be some important limitations here. Any model that's small enough to fit on your laptop is not going to be a very powerful model. And in order to run powerful models, you're going to need powerful hardware. So this can become very expensive. And there is a lot of great work being done in open source to make these models smaller, but still powerful. However, we're still talking about requiring multi-thousands of dollars worth of hardware, expensive GPUs. Although, like I said, even on that hardware side, those costs are coming down. So I think this is going to become more and more of a realistic option. But at this stage, it's probably not realistic that on your everyday devices, you're going to get a powerful enough model to give you the intelligence you need. So then you have this other option, which is sort of self-hosting on a cloud that you already have access to. So you can take now larger open source models and you can host them on something like Google Cloud, AWS, whatever it is that you're using. The problem here is that this is obviously less private than running it locally. Now the cloud company has access to that data, and it's also going to be very expensive because you're going to have to rent this very expensive hardware. So the third option that kind of addresses the downfalls of both of those previous ones is using models that are encrypted end to end. So encryption is essentially your data gets mashed up into something unreadable, unrecognizable. You hold a key privately that can decode that mess of data. And what you can do with these models is the model actually runs the entire process of processing that data, giving you a response on your encrypted data. So essentially you get the same sort of privacy benefits of running it locally, but you get access to much more powerful models, and you get that at just the cost of the API calls rather than having to actually rent your own hardware. So some recommendations that I have here, if you're interested in running models locally. There's software called Ollama. And if you want to do the end-to-end encrypted option, there's this company called Private Mode AI that offers that service. So we're going to be building some more tools to expand on this toolkit very soon on Sunday. We're going to be working on some 4 main kind of categories of projects. One is going to be looking at Animal Welfare Act records and how we can sort of weaponize that data for litigation. One's going to be looking at objecting to factory farms using an automated process where we find these sort of applications, permits to councils very early on and get alerted about them. Another one's going to be a FOIA agent, so automating a lot of that process around sending out those FOIA requests and most importantly, following up on them when they go into the black hole. And finally, we have wildlife intelligence, which is going to cover things like Tiger ID that you heard about from Noah before. So really encourage everyone to come along to this, even if you don't have a technical background. We also need people with a legal background here to actually make sure that our developers are doing the right thing from a legal perspective too. So whatever your skill set is, that's going to be hugely helpful. So I encourage you to come along, and thank you all for your time.
Well, probably, but I'll start.
Thanks.
Sorry, y'all, I'm complicated. I gotta go back and forth from slides to the internet, slides to the internet. Okay. All right. So I probably have the background that is the furthest from animal law in this room at this point. So I've been counseling technology companies since I graduated from here. And I've been using AI tools in my day-to-day practice for over 2 years now. And so there's basically nothing I do day to day that doesn't involve an AI tool, whether it's drafting emails, drafting contracts, doing anything, there is an AI tool involved. And it is really streamlined and made things a lot more efficient, but also means that I can get a lot more done during the day. And it means that my clients aren't having to pay, $20,000 to do something, and makes legal services a lot more affordable, which means that small businesses can do a lot of things they didn't used to do. And so that is why about 1.5 years ago, I went off on my own as a fractional GC to be able to help more startups, because you don't need a full-time lawyer as quickly as you once did because of these tools, and you can support them part-time from the outside at an earlier stage. So we're really going to connect all of these presentations together to really talk about, like, if you want to leave today, log into ChatGPT. I encourage you to take out your phones. You can do this on your phone. We're not going to be using confidential information. I also encourage you, if you want, my favorite AI tool out there is GCAI. They give a 7-day free trial. They also give 50% off to nonprofits. So keep that in mind if it's something you're looking at. To Sam's point about multi-models, we're going to look at that today by comparing ChatGPT, which is whatever OpenAI's model is that you're choosing to use. We're just going to, use their standard one right now. And then GCAI is that multi-model type method where they're using Anthropic's Claude, they're using OpenAI's, they're using Gemini, then they're using a whole source of a bunch of other ones, including some, eventually they'll be including some open source tools as well. So we're going to start with some of the basics. And this doesn't matter what you do. This is the elements of a successful prompt. One of the biggest problems that people have when they get started with AI, and why they get hallucination and why they get crap, essentially, is that they will prompt like it's Google search. And it is not Google search. And the thing that everybody needs to accept when they're using these tools is we have to get away from instant gratification. The more that you put into your prompt, the more time that you spend perfecting your prompts, the more time you spend tinkering with it, the better the output. You write one sentence or you type into it like Google search, garbage in, garbage out. And I think that, I think it was Sam, you had mentioned something about, or maybe Tony, you did, about how the tool is very much, has been trained on human nature. And I'll give you a good example of this. If you've ever looked at podcast AI out there and you have a lot of students use this when they're learning a new topic, you can put a whole bunch of information in and it'll do an hour-long podcast on that information. And in that podcast, you know what it does every 15 minutes? We'll be right back for commercial break. And why is that? Because it's been trained on actual podcast material, and you hear that in every podcast, and the AI has been trained to do that. There won't actually be any commercials played in your podcast. But so keep that in mind with these prompts, that if you treat it like you are wanting to talk to an intern, or you want to be talking to an experienced lawyer or a type of expert in a field, you have to be prompting it to go and act in that way, because it will then go to those resources. So I'm not going to go over everything on the screen here. Take a picture with your phone. We'll go a little bit into it, but we'll basically do, I call this my shortcut formula. If you walk away remembering nothing, just remember the shortcut formula. What is the role? What is the task? What is the context? What is the format? And what are the constraints? Okay. So what is the role that we're playing? I'm a lawyer. Maybe that's the role I'm playing. Maybe it's not. There are a lot of times, especially if you are in a persuasive position, where you actually want to take the opposite role. There are a lot of times where I put in there, I am a 25-year-old startup CEO who has never actually worked for a company in my entire life. How am I going to explain this to them in words that they are going to care about, right? And so putting that sort of context to it is really helpful. The task is, what are we doing? Are we drafting? Are we writing something in an email? Is this for a practical purpose? Is this for publication? Right? You got to explain what the task is. And this is, anybody that's been a manager of any sort, you know that if you don't tell somebody what it is that you're looking for, you're probably not going to get what you actually wanted. Same thing with AI. And the AI has gotten really good. It can do, tables and charts and PowerPoints and, any sort of that is out there and imaginable at this point, videos and pictures. I'm sure that some of the more technical folks here could raise their hand and tell me what AI can't do. But I think for the most part, anything we do in our day-to-day jobs at this point, it can produce that for you. Format. And format can mean a lot of different things. Am I looking to put an email together and I want it to be bullet points? That's a formatting issue. Do I want it to be full sentences and formal because this is going to go into a persuasive memo? All of that is super important, and the AI can do it in whatever way you want. And then constraints, and those constraints can mean things. It can mean various things, but the most common one I like to tell people is, are we going out to the internet or are we not going out to the internet? And what I mean by that is, are we doing research and I want you to go out to the internet, or am I supplying you the materials and I want you to look at nothing except what's in these materials? And that's it. And so that is one of those items, right, where I definitely say, the confidentiality concerns definitely matter here. But if we're talking about generalized research, I don't see any issue with going and using some of the free tools, going and asking, what is the Animal Welfare Act, and tell me about the Animal Welfare Act. I think that is where anybody today, can go and start using those tools and really aiding in the learning process. Okay. And then these are some other tips. Use headers, use statements rather than questions. Yes. I like to say that the AI tool is a 12-year-old teenage girl, super confident. She knows everything, going on in the world. She knows better than her parents. And you have to treat the AI that way. But the AI also has the confidence of that same teenage girl. So if you ask it a question, it will doubt itself. And so from that perspective, if you're like, what is the AWA? It's going to ask itself and go out to the internet and go, I don't know, what is the AWA? And it will spit out a confident answer, but it may have actually less confidence to it rather than you saying, please tell me about the AWA. And yes, the please and thank yous do make a difference with the AI because again, it was trained on human behavior. So politeness does matter. If you ever want to see the AI get angry, go and be angry at the AI. It will be, you can do that on your Friday night. Those are the type of fun things I do. And then color emojis, especially I think are important for the legal side and visual effect to make things really helpful for you. I do this with risk. If I am reviewing a contract, if I'm reviewing something, I want high risk to be red, medium risk to be yellow. The fact that there's a severability clause, I do not care, put it in green, right? Those sorts of things. So that way, if I need to move through something quickly, I have the visual stance to do that, but I'm still getting all the information that I need. So I can still check all of those green items. Okay, now this is where I'm going to need help probably. Let's see. Oh, it did. Is it sharing or no? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I hope everybody online can see that okay too. Okay, so I prepared some prompts in advance. Not that we can't do this on the fly, but I didn't want to chance us having to sit here and spin for 10 minutes. So this, I was taking the position of if I was Tony and the ALDF and said, you know, research and compile a list of upcoming legislative topics for the 2025-2026 year. And structure, you know, the responses. So this is my prompt. And as you can see, it's pretty lengthy. This isn't a Google. So from that perspective, I've been very clear about what I want it to look like, how I want it to prioritize the items. And this, of course, I want to be very clear with the prompts I'm using today, because the one thing that we won't be going to, because I wasn't sure if we'd have time, maybe we will, is I tend to do a lot of what Tony was referring to, which is follow-on prompts, where you have one big prompt and then you can follow on and highlight things and reply to it and start to really dig into the material. But I wanted to, for today, let's pretend that I'm a new intern, a new associate. I'm trying to get caught up to speed on things. I know nothing. Let's start there and can help me dig into it. And so this is the kind of output that gets you. And the one thing that, you know, I like with a proprietary tool like this is you can see all the sources. You can see what it's going out to. And so for those people worried about hallucination, you can see whether these are, you know, actual sources that we want, or whether maybe these are not sources that we don't want. And not saying that they are or that they aren't, right? But they're there. And if we were in my logged in version, you can actually click in and it'll show you the source. It can take you out to the source so you can check your work. And that's why I like to say, if you treat your AI like it is an intern in your computer, it's very helpful. And if anybody has had interns, what do? You always tell them, like, give me the sources, tell me where you got this information from. And that is how you leverage AI in your day-to-day practice to make sure that you're not getting falsified cases, crap. And you may get in the same way that an intern may give you a crap resource. But if you have the resources at your fingertips, you can decide what is the actual crap versus these are legitimate and good resources to be able to then go back and ask the AI, by the way, don't go to this resource, try again. The same way you would say to an intern. Okay. So let's see what it came up with. We'll have to scroll a little bit. This is going to be a little lengthy. So again, I gave it a really, really broad task, right? And so this is a high level summary. And what I do love about this, especially if you get like news alerts from your law firms or anything along those lines, you can put those through AI and have them synthesize it to make it applicable to you, which is what I do for each of my clients. to send them specialized, hey, this is coming down the pipe. Here's how this is actually going to apply to you and your business, rather than those alerts we get from law firms that are 10 pages long and 200 of them a week, and nobody has time for that. Right. And now we can synthesize it down into a few sentences for each of these, legislative priorities, for example. So that way I can say, like, are these relevant or are these not relevant to what I'm working on today? And then you can see that was federal. Then we get into some state-based here. It even went out to the internet in this one, which wasn't exactly what I was hoping it would do, which is looked at actual cases that ALDF is involved in. And then, of course, it went into the regulatory developments and even international developments, which may or may not, again, be a priority. And then the thing that I asked it at the very end, and again, I know we didn't go through this and I wasn't expecting anybody to read it, was I asked it to include a summary of the top 5 highest priority items. This is a little bit of a trick, and I will warn you on this. Anything subjective with AI is going to be difficult. It does not know what your priorities are. That being said, experiment with it. I think you'll find that shockingly, it's pretty good 75% of the time. And on this list of 5, you'll probably see 3 or even 4 that you're like, yeah, that was pretty spot on. It's not perfect, but again, treat it like an intern. Your intern isn't going to know your organization's priorities either. And if they're getting 75% of them, that's a really, really good intern. And so we'll go to that. Just so you guys can see, and you can see like it's structuring this to be really absorbable, which is how I use AI from a formatting perspective, right? I don't want long memos. I don't have time for long memos. That's just not going to be how I practice. I don't think anybody practices that way anymore from trying to learn about this information. And it's basically stack ranking the priorities in terms of, whether not only it's a high priority, and then the AI doing a little bit of its own flavor, which is where I like to say it's the intern trying to prove its value. Where it's saying, are we going to be defensive on this matter or proactive on this matter? And that wasn't something I asked it for. But that's something it threw in as, helpful. And then, of course, it's got some other little recommendations here at the end. And, what's nice about a lot of these tools is you can download it as a Word doc, as a PDF. If this was like a PowerPoint, it would spin up a PowerPoint, that you could do. If there was a table, you could download it directly into Excel, which means you can sort it, put filters on it, run all of that and do everything. And so keep that in mind. Like, some of these tools you can do even though they don't really cost a ton of money, you can do a lot with them and they don't need to be, crazy big in order to get there. All right, let's see if I can get this out of the way. If I can hide that. Okay, so this is the ChatGPT version. Okay. I want to be very clear. This is the exact same word for word prompt. There is nothing different, but this is a one model and it will have a lot of similarities because GCAI that we were just showing does include OpenAI. The beauty of a multi-model system is that because the AIs are talking to each other and the programming in the background that all of the wonderful engineers have done, they have taken the best of the models and they have told it to don't use the worst of the model. So if there's a model that's really good with research, it's telling in the background and the prompt engineering and the coding, go to that model when there's research to be done. But if there's a really good model for drafting, it's saying, but when it comes time to take that research and actually draft about it, you model become the priority. And I like to think of that as like a group project where we all take our strengths and we all ignore our weaknesses. And so that's, that is why a lot of times it is better to be using these type proprietary models rather than, or I shouldn't say proprietary, they're all proprietary. But by using, even like an open pause that has taken a bunch of these models together and combined them rather than a single source like a ChatGPT that is a commercial model that's available out there. All right. So ChatGPT does let you see its thinking too. It's a little less exact. It tells you the thinking in the way if you had a really annoying intern that was slacking you every 30 seconds, like, I'm formatting the citations now. I've researched this, I've Googled this. That's essentially what the thinking is. But you can see they did all this in 57 seconds, which no intern can do. And you can see it's come up with a different list. Doesn't mean the list is better or worse, but this is where I do this in my own practice. I sometimes run the same chat through 3 or 4 different things to see what I get out of it. And that will help me, especially if this is a new topic. This is not an animal law thing, but I had a random client who needed to bring some camera equipment into Latin America. And the question was, what are the export controls for that? I have no idea. And when we went to external counsel in the Latin America region, they told us it was going to be $20,000 to do the analysis. And I said, that's insanity for $500 worth of camera equipment. At that point, we might as well just buy it and somehow have it shipped in there and just leave it, which from an environmental perspective, I think we can all respect is silly. And so with the use of these tools, we were able to figure out what the process is in far less than $20,000 and engage, our local attorney on it to be able to do that in $1,000, which is a heck of a lot more reasonable. And also that meant, a lot more environmentally friendly. So this one you can see is definitely a little bit different. It does citations as well inline, which some people do like. The other tool I have, it does the citations up above, and I didn't see it on this particular one, but usually there's numbers. Think of it like footnotes, and you can click on the little numbers and it'll go out to them. And let's go down and see how it did. This one was a little bit more verbose. And you can see that the way it did priorities was very, this is just a 5-point bullet list, very different, exact same prompt. And so the other thing that a lot of the AI tools will do, which I always encourage people to read because this may help you, is you can see it's offering up to do other things for you. Build a tracking spreadsheet. And, basically it's recommending what the fields in that spreadsheet should be. And so a lot of times this can be really helpful, especially for those sorts of activities. I don't need to go back to the slide. I'll just go to the next use case and jump into it. Hopefully my screen is still great. Okay. So I will fully admit I gave the AI a beast of a task, and it's going to do a shitty job because I gave it a beast of a task. I would not recommend doing what I did, but for the purposes of being demonstrative here, I wanted to draft an entire public comment. That is not what I would recommend doing. If I were to do this, I would start by asking the AI to give an outline, and then we would follow on one small section at a time until we got to where we wanted. But I still think that this is a good way of showing you how you can get this stuff done a lot faster than the way we have done it traditionally. And I think that there's a lot more you can add into your prompt. I didn't... Here in this particular one, I just asked it to do a general public comment. I did not want to offend any organizations by implying. If I were to do this again, if I were actually working for one of your organizations, you would put a lot of detail into your prompt about what you are trying to persuade about and what it is that you are trying to get across. The only thing I told it was, when I was drafting this was obviously we are pro-animal. Other than that, there's not a lot more detail here. But you can see, again, following those sort of rules, I've put headings, that there's instructions. I've put all the details in here about the bill number, the bill name, right? So that way I'm not having to go control, find all, replace, or fix these edits. All of those sorts of nitty-gritty details should be correct in here. And then, of course, I'm giving it the context. This is a public comment. Like, we got to be super professional. I don't want to see bullet points. I want to see a clear introduction, a proper conclusion, And this is where you are treating your AI almost not like an intern, but like they're 10 years old and in school and doing their first book report. And then that we need to do references, and that there need to be citation tags. And you can do the citation tags whatever you want. If you want to take a screenshot at some point, this is the common, like I'll call it the AI citation tag. If you just want cites to show up in something, and you can throw that in, and that will give you the citations. Okay, then you can see it did a whole bunch of research. And it's given a summary at the top, basically explanation. I consider this like your header email, so to speak. And then it's given a draft, and I've given it a beast of a task, remember that. So this comment is going to be very, very short compared to what you would typically see. That being said, I still think if you're looking at it from an outline perspective, it's given you a pretty darn good outline as to how you would want your public comment to be structured. There's changes you would want to make. You're going to want to get a lot more detailed in the weed. You can see some of those citations. It's not going to pop up because I'm not logged in. But you can see all of that here. And, you know, if I was logged in, you could highlight and reply specifically on that and say, hey, this is great, but really I want to talk about X, Y, and Z. I want to be far more verbose. You can say how verbose you want to be. I want to be 5 to 7 more sentences on this, right? And it will give you 5 to 7 more sentences on that. If you have word count requirements, character count requirements, anything like that, depending on the legislative, you know, body that you're working with, put that into the prompt. So that way, eventually, when you've got all of your paragraphs together and you need to synthesize it, and as we all used to sit there in Word dreading the word count being over by 200 words, you can take that now and put it into your AI tool and say, I need to cut out 200 words somewhere. Help me do this while not changing the intent of what I'm trying to get across. Okay, let's see if I can get to the ChatGPT version. Okay. Again, exact same prompt. Because this isn't a legal specific tool and doesn't have a lot of the prompt engineering, you'll notice it's a little bit different. It's going to be drafted a little bit more colloquially, just because I find that a lot with ChatGPT. It just and recently, as of last week, they did just put a prohibition in that you can't use it for legal advice or health advice or anything like that. And that they have basically programmed it to not give advice in those contexts. If you need help overriding that, come see me. There are ways you can prompt around it. But just letting you know so that they don't get in violation of practicing law, given the AI is clearly not a lawyer. And so you can see this is far more of a summary. It didn't do as good as job. Some of the citations end up seeing the code of the citation instead. But again, as an outline goes, it's still a pretty decent sized outline and a good starting point. And then it does give a summary of the sources with an appendix, but this is sometimes where the AI goes awry and we have to do this 2 or 3 times. But this is why I say that there's a lot of patience involved with this, and to make sure you spend a lot of time on the prompting side. Okay, now I need to get back to the PowerPoint. No, I'm not even going to try. I'm going to try on this computer. 1 minute. Great. Okay. So what I'll finish with is just making sure that when you're looking for your organization, you're looking at how you're going to integrate the AI with what you do every day. So if it's emails, if it's public commenting, do you even need that at this point? Security and confidentiality concerns, all of that's important. And then this is just kind of my word vomit. Nobody's paying me to put up these names up here in any way, but there are tons of different legal specific tools out there on the market. There's general tools, there's research specific tools. If you have any questions about any of these, happy to talk with anybody afterwards. I do a lot of this sort of advising with my clients and everything. And so I work with a lot of these tools day to day myself in my practice and can give you my view there, and especially help if you're trying to figure out, you know, what is going to work for your organization. Happy to chat with anyone after.
Thank you.
Well, that was a lot of amazing information.
So questions, we have time for questions.
Hello. Thank you for all of your presentations. And I wonder if you or any of you can comment on Perplexity AI. I'm asking because my university just gave every student a 1 year free access to Perplexity Pro. Is that any good? Is the model any good?
So I think that Perplexity did have a big competitive advantage in kind of being first to integrate search. So I think there was a time where Perplexity did have a really unique value proposition. I think now that all of the models are kind of integrating search, maybe the gap is a little bit less. But I think that what Perplexity does well is the user interface around having follow-up questions for additional research. So I think it's yeah, the tool worth using, especially if you're going to get it for free. But I think that it's not as much of a unique value proposition as what it used to be.
Hello, I have a few questions. I'll try not to ask too many. First, I do want to say one thing Perplexity has that others don't is the ability to do a patent search. So I'm not a lawyer, but I would recommend still going to a patent lawyer afterwards, but to start the initial search to give you an idea if your idea has merit, if it's being used elsewhere, it's good for that. Otherwise, as Sam said, it's generally just as good as another tool, but not any better. Okay. So for Sam and Tony, mostly, you guys talked about enterprise model use, data security. I'm wondering if there are any specific guardrails beyond what's offered on whatever enterprise solution you chose that you implement for prompt injection, jailbreak attempts, shadow AI within your own company and surfacing that, etc.
So just to clarify on the question, are you talking about like for sort of like our tools that we host, or are you talking about like for the average user of the tool?
I'm not sure. I'm going to say both.
All right. So yeah, for like prompt injection, I think that this is something that's going to be really important if you're doing like web search. So one of the things we integrate is kind of like a pre-processing stage before it kind of goes to the main AI agent. So you can basically scrape the content of the website, and then you can have an agent that's doing verification on, is there, say, hidden content in that is giving additional instruction. I think one of the areas like for that where the biggest risk is in browser automation. So this is something that I think is important for like users to be aware of with the new AI browsers that are coming out, you know, things like Comet from Perplexity, Atlas from ChatGPT, is that people can actually put in instructions to override what the AI's actual instructions that you're giving it are. They can make that like essentially invisible text, so humans can't actually see it on the website. And there has been like some hacks that have been proven, at least as like proof of concepts around that. So I think primarily, yeah, the biggest risk I see with prompt injection is with like the browser automation itself. And so I think that really like the best advice I could give for that with end users is just like don't have your kind of confidential accounts and credentials in those browser automations, maybe use them for things like research, or if you have to use an account, have it like a secondary account, not your primary account. And yeah, what was the other part of the question? So there's prompt injection, jailbreaking.
Well, you already kind of talked about data poisoning a little bit, but I think you kind of wrapped it up pretty nicely. I did have one follow-up to that. Do you do any kind of automated penetration testing for the solutions that you offer?
Yes, yeah, we do like penetration tests on all of the things that we build. So we have like a third-party cybersecurity person that we work with who basically, does stress test those systems. And, I like to do a little bit of that myself as well.
It's a lot of fun. Okay,
Yes.
one more question for Laurel, and then I'll hand this to somebody else. I love the fact that you're using emojis in your prompts. I also use emojis. I think they provide some interesting opportunities for steering the LLM or the AI. Are you familiar with Prompt Perfect or other prompting as a service providers that will optimize your prompts using a multi-model or ensemble approach?
Yeah, so GCAI does it inherently in theirs. I always say I'm a really lazy lawyer and I don't like to do things twice. So they have what is known as an easy prompt feature. So you can type in colloquially, or if you're me and you're lazy, you talk into your computer while I'm reading on my screen, whatever it is. And then I have it take whatever I've, word to text that it's gotten there. I put it through easy prompt and then I go through the prompt and I edit it down. But yes, I think that is the way that we end up getting everybody to be an expert level prompter. And until the commercial models offer that, I don't think any of them are right now. Don't quote me on that, but I haven't seen it embedded in a Perplexity, a ChatGPT or Claude or any of those right now. Yes, I do encourage definitely using that, but I think if you have the ability to get access to a paid service such as that, to make sure it's got that sort of functionality built into it, because I think it just speeds you up and it's a lot faster than me trying to go out to that prompting service, doing it there and then bringing it back in. And I do think that they build it specifically for their service, so you're getting the best built prompt for the service as well.
Yeah, and if I can add to that as well, with the open pause tools, all of them have an enhanced prompt button that's built in. So, it's just a single click to improve that. And we also do the same thing on the back end. So actually, as it starts going through that process I described, even if you haven't clicked to enhance your prompt, it's actually going to do that based on the information that it has about you to make sure that you get a good result. So yeah, I think the prompt engineering is very important by default, but we've really tried to create these tools to be as simple as possible to use so that, you don't have to engineer the prompt perfectly.
Hi, sorry I'm asking a lot of questions today. My internal monologue is crazy. Thank you for your presentations. This panel has taught me a lot about how important AI is and how useful it can be for individuals in law. And I know tomorrow is more about some panels will talk about the negative effects of AI, but I'm the kind of person who can't get themselves to use AI because of ethical dilemmas, just because of data centers are negatively impacting my community. And I don't know if there's some kind of disconnect that I'm not seeing, or if I should just trust in the process that everything will be okay in the end. I'm not really sure, but I'm interested in your perspectives.
Yeah, so I think that there's kind of two layers in which to think about this question. There's kind of the large scale data center side, and then there's what is the actual impact of your individual use. So the huge majority of the sort of environmental impact of AI is coming from the massive training runs. And as far as the actual use, I think people are generally quite surprised by how small it is, say, per query. So an example that I like to use is, you often see these comments on social media about, the environmental impact of AI. It takes more carbon for you to type that on your phone if it takes you 5 minutes on social media than it does for ChatGPT to answer that for you. So like one query is about the same as using social media for 5 minutes. So there, you can imagine like then when we're looking at these tasks of research that might take, weeks or months, if you can get that done with a single query, it's actually carbon positive overall because the impact of that one query is less than what you would have used, computationally on having your computer open that long. So I also see this with like things like video calls, for example. We often don't think about the fact all of these things have environmental impacts. So yes, the data centers, like there is a huge environmental problem there, but it's a very tiny fraction of what those data centers are doing that's actually like answering a query from an AI system. Mostly it's training, and even bigger than training is things like video streaming that we often don't even think about. I mean, how many of us just watch like hours and hours of Netflix? We don't think about that as being environmentally destructive, but then we're worried about, asking ChatGPT a question. So I think that that's one thing that's important to think about is the distinction between recognizing this can be a very real issue on a systemic level, but also recognizing what is the impact of our individual use and that being quite small. So I think that what's happening with data centers definitely is an issue that we need to address, but I think like it's not an issue that's going to be solved by asking ChatGPT less questions. So another thing I would say is that AI is, maybe current practices and say like the frontier labs are currently, very destructive for the environment. But I think that AI isn't something that inherently has to be as destructive as it is. So an example here is we actually did train a model, like a large language model with open pause. So that's by far the most environmentally destructive part of the AI process, right? Is training a model. So what we did is we used a relatively small model. We used an open source one that already existed, and we fine-tuned it. So we actually tracked our carbon emissions as we were doing this. We used like like server regions that have a large percentage of energy that's renewable. So we calculated this whole process of how much was the carbon emissions, and it was less than a tenth of the carbon emissions of a single serving of beef. So that's for the actual training, yet alone for the inference of providing answers from that is going to be even less. So, I think everything that we do does have an environmental impact, but we have to also look at, I guess, the trade-offs of what kind of environmental impact can we prevent with these technologies, right? If we can fight factory farms with this and we can, reduce these industries that are some of the largest polluters on the planet, then maybe, that trade-off of us having some environmental impact to prevent a much larger environmental impact is, worth the trade-off.
That's going to make for some great Thanksgiving conversation. And you've got that friend or family member at the Thanksgiving table saying, well, it's just one burger. Now you have a comparison that an entire data center potentially is less problematic than that one burger.
Any questions? Well, maybe, yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Comments?
I don't know if you realize changing the language we use to prompt the AI could change the outcome, and maybe often I realize the change in attitude. So one thing I often do in my research, which is AI's impact on animals in general, I try to get the models to give the worst attitudes toward animals. And one thing I often do is to ask them to design bad welfare farms. for animals. And I often realize it's easiest when I say it in Chinese. Well, I only know Chinese and English as written languages, so I can only interchange between these two. But yeah, after failing to prompt an AI to design a particular farm for a particular species of animal, let's say I often make them up, like zebra farm. I change it into Chinese and suddenly it just worked. Right. I wonder if you realized such patterns for other languages like Spanish or like I guess they're still Eurocentric, but yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of strong research that suggests like lower resource languages are easier to jailbreak models in. So a lot of the safety tuning that happens through things like RLHF, that is essentially, yeah, easier to overcome if there's less training data. But I think that what you're touching on is maybe more so like the different attitudes that the AI adopts, say at a deeper level, sort of before that next step comes about. And I think like, I mean, I think this will be stuff you already know, but you know, for everyone else here, it's like you need to think about these things as like statistical engines of probability, right? So they're thinking about in a string of tokens or words, what is the most likely thing that comes next? So if it sees certain attitudes and you know a set of words before that or a set of characters or a language, it is more likely to then you know predict what it's seen within that data set. So there definitely is an impact where prompting in different languages, you get more of kind of a reflection of the culture of the language that you're prompting in.
Okay. Well, please join me in thanking our wonderful panel for all this great information. And we are near the end of our day. So a couple of things. There is a reception with more food. If folks want in the same room. Tomorrow we'll be back here for more engaging conversations. We'll be talking about, to Mariah's point, so first some applications, right? So thinking about more, how are people using this to help animals? And then what are those impacts, right? So that'll be another panel. We'll be thinking about animal research as a particular use context. Then we're gonna have a brainstorming session with all of us to think about next steps, given what we've learned and the questions that have been raised here. Where do we go from here? So Jamie will lead us in that, and then we'll have a wrap up for tomorrow. And then of course we'll have our hackathon on Sunday. So that's it for today. Let us know if you have any questions or concerns. And if not, please join us for the reception. Thank you. Yeah. Bye.